Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, I'm going to be predicting the balance changes which should be happening sometime next week with the update. Hopefully these ones are pretty meaningful because the last batch really didn't do anything to shift up the meta, and I'm hoping for some reworks and some other things as well. So before we get into it, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already, and let's hop into the buffs then. So the first off, of course, we need to take a look at Doug. So Doug for a long time has been terrible. I'm hoping now it's finally his time to receive some type of rework. So whether that's like the heal trait that Berry has, whether that's a tank trait like a lot of tanks have, or whether that's increased range, or just something to make him a little bit more viable. I think if they're to do any of those though, they'd actually have to nerf his supercharge rate just a little bit because he could become too toxic, but he needs one of these buffs. So next up, I'm going to predict that Hank is going to receive the tank traits. I've been saying for a long time now that he needs this trait because the main reason they're not looking to buff Hank in any other way in terms of like his base stats or anything like that. It looks like because they want to be careful and not make him too strong like he was before, but adding the tank trait at least makes it so he can get his super more frequently. Let's just face it, a lot of time Hank can just easily get outranged and he just gets destroyed. At least with a tank trait he can build up a super and then at least defend himself a little bit. So next up, we're going to predict that Bo is going to receive a buff. I'm hoping that they revert one of two changes. So he was broken about a year ago. They buffed his damage and his supercharge rate, and then they nerfed both of those. I think they need to revert one of these changes. So either give him a damage buff. Of course everyone around him is receiving damage buffs, so why not just give it to Bo as well? And then I actually would rather see a supercharge rate buff though. So before it was 8 shots to get super, now it's 9, so just make it 8 again. And his mines aren't even that good anymore, so at least it just gives him something more in the meta. So next up, we're going to predict that Pam's going to receive a buff. So Pam has been really bad for about 6 months now. She's not been seen in competitive meta for a long time, so around the D tier, maximum C tier for a very long time now. And I think it's because mainly there's just so many high DPS brawlers in the meta which just shred through her, and even her healing can't keep up with that, and of course these hype charges as well. But I just think in a 1v1 Pam just doesn't have enough in her anymore, and especially when you consider Pearl, for example, who can just shred and is exactly like Pam but better. Yeah, I think Pam needs a bit of a damage buff, so like 6% to keep up with the damage inflation. So next I'm going to predict that Bonnie's going to receive a buff or a rework. So Bonnie's been, again, very down in the meta for a long time now. Maybe she receives a hype charge, but if she doesn't, she needs some type of rework, because since the introduction of Mo, it's very clear that Bonnie is just a way worse version of him in that sense. I think it's really dumb for her to just sit out of her cannon form for like 20 seconds. She's way too vulnerable. She has no range or anything. It's just every time you jump in, you're pretty much going to die straight away after. So at least decreasing the time for her to get back into cannon form. Right now it's nearly 20 seconds, so decreasing that to like 10 seconds, 8 seconds just will make her a bit better. So next up, we're going to predict that Maisie's going to receive a buff. The main reason being is actually because she's like the poster girl for this season, right? We've got all these cool skins, and normally what they like to do is they like to buff a brawler, or at least make them good if they've got a skin, right? So I think that's the reason why they're going to buff Maisie again. But Maisie is pretty bad in the meta. She's still like a D tier brawler, like C tier at best. It's just way too risky to use her, and even though she got a damage buff, that wasn't her main problem. But I think they should either increase the range or increase the projectile speed. They need to do one of two things. I never want to kind of keep her at this skilled marksman, but it's still too difficult, especially with hype charges in the game, to just hit shots consistently. So they need to do one of two things. So Mr. P desperately needs a buff, and I'm going to predict that he's going to receive a buff to his Porter HP. So with Mr. P, I've been noticing everybody's been receiving damage buffs, and with hyper charges as well. And I just don't get any value with my Porters anymore. Before, they used to be pretty good, especially against single shot brawlers, but I don't even think they're good against single shot brawlers anymore. So just a slight HP buff would be nice. I don't want them to over buff it, because if you rewind back to like 3 years ago when his Porters used to just take over the map, yeah, we don't want that again, but it definitely needs a little bit of a look. So next up we have Eve, and again I feel like Eve has the same fate as Mr. P Porters. I think her hatchlings just aren't that great. It's actually gone to the point where I don't even use the quadruplets mythic gear much anymore, because I just realized they just get shredded so quickly. Maybe they could lessen the decay of the health of the hatchlings, or just simply buff the HP of them. I just think they need a little bit of something, because right now she's terrible. So next up, we're going to predict that Charlie's going to receive a buff. The main reason being is because even with her recent buff, she's not really been a competitive option. She's still like maximum C tier in the meta. Very underwhelming, so she needs to receive either 1 or 2 buffs. I'm hoping they don't increase her range, because that made her too strong. I'm hoping they either buff her damage again ever so slightly, or buff her supercharge rate ever so slightly. You need to be really careful with Charlie because she's actually been the most versatile brawler this year, always consistently at the S tier. So let's slowly give her some buffs and see what they do. The next balance change I'm going to predict is Miko. So actually, we already know that Miko's receiving a buff, but why not just talk about it? So Miko probably is going to get a HP buff. It's going to be around 400 to 600 HP. Is that going to be enough to make Miko a competitive option? I think that'd at least make him maybe a good late pick option, but if you wanted Miko to be a bit stronger, maybe you could look at buffing his damage a little bit as well because it is very underwhelming right now. And lastly, for the buffs then, I'm going to predict that Draco's going to receive a buff. So Draco has been pretty underrated, I would say, but at the same time, it's just not been his meta. I don't think it'll ever be his meta until he gets a hypercharge, maybe, but I just think they need to probably increase the range of his Dragon Super. So, might be a very hot take, but I feel like it should have a little bit more power. So, people have been asking to buff him in his normal form before he goes into his super form, but I think we should keep that pretty weak so he's counterable, but make Dragon form a bit strong. So now moving on to the nerfs, I'm going to predict with the update. First one is going to be with Mo. So a lot of people are saying that Mo isn't as good as he used to be, like A tier. I still think he's S tier. He's not like anything broken. He's not a top 3 brawler in the game maybe anymore, but he still probably needs a nerf to his super. His super's the reason why he's still so meta. He either needs a nerf to his knockback with his super or something to do with his super damage. One of these would actually turn him down a lot. The next nerf I'm going to predict is with Kenji, and boy is Kenji the best brawler in the game by far right now, so he probably needs a couple of nerfs to tone him down. The first one hopefully being to something like his reload speed. So let's just face it, Kenji's reload speed is absolutely crazy considering he can just be Mortis and, you know, like a brawler like BB combined. It's just crazy. So we probably need to nerf his reload speed just a little bit, not too much, because that's kind of like the fun of using Kenji, right? Or they need to attack his healing trait. So his healing trait is so toxic. He can use healing through his super. He can heal from so many different things, which I just don't think he needs to do. Maybe they could remove it altogether or just nerf it. They need to attack him in multiple avenues though. So the next nerf I'm going to predict is with Rico, and it really pains me to say it, but Rico is one of the most popular brawlers in the game right now, and he deserves a couple of nerfs. So the first one, absolutely to his gadget. His gadget is so good. People just spam it like crazy. They panic gadget all of the time. They just spam that thing, and they just get a million kills. And then on top of that, the hypercharge is too strong. So we want a gadget nerf, and we want a hypercharge charge rate nerf as well. Next nerf I'm going to predict is with Daryl, and Daryl isn't toxic or anything. A lot of people still underestimate him, but he probably deserves a little nerf. So I don't know how they go about it, because I just think fundamentally having 2 supers is too strong. But I think they maybe should just nerf his HP a little bit, maybe nerf one of his star powers so it gets less shielding, or maybe nerf the amount of shield you get with one of your supers, just something along those lines, just so he's a bit squishier. The next nerf I'm going to predict is with Stu. So I'm going to predict that he gets a small nerf on his super charge rate. So it's nothing crazy. You're probably going to get like 2 a game, but I still believe it's too quick to get that hyper charge, considering it's probably the best hyper charge in the game. And you should only really get it once a game because mechanically it's broken, just supering everywhere around the map. Yeah, it looks like a mutation. It probably shouldn't be in the game, it's that strong. So let's just nerf the hypercharge rate a little bit. The next nerf I'm predicting is with Frank. So he should definitely get a nerf with his hypercharge rate. I know they'll kind of want to keep it like that for whatever reason, but because he builds up his hypercharge through just taking damage, and his tankiest brawler in the game, he cycles through it so quickly. It takes him just over 2 supers to charge through one, so you're probably going to get like 3, 4 in the game. His hypercharge itself isn't broken, but it's just mainly the fact that you can just charge down opponents so easily. So either gotta nerf the hypercharge rate or at least nerf the shield that you get with the hypercharge. 25% is crazy on a brawler like Frank. Next nerf I'm predicting is Angelo, but actually I don't think he'll receive a nerf, but I want to see a nerf with Angelo because he's just too toxic. He's good at literally everything, and as a sniper, just the amount of damage that you do 4k is just crazy to me. I think we should either nerf the damage or the health of Angelo because it's just too strong. Next up, we're going to predict a nerf with Shade. So everyone is going crazy at how strong Shade is right now. I don't think it's like Larry Lorry broken, definitely not that scale, but he is very, very good in the right hands. I think they should do one of 2 nerfs. So one nerf they should completely remove straight away is the fact that his super speed stacks. I just don't understand that. Why can't he just go the speed of light? That makes no sense to Shade, in my opinion. It's fun. It's very fun, but it just shouldn't exist in the game, let's face it. 3, 4 supers and you can fly across the map in lightning speed. That should not be happening. And they could probably nerf his super duration just by a second. So that just means that he's more vulnerable. Next nerf I'm predicting is with RT. So I'd like to see one of 2. Either a super charge rate nerf with him, or they need to nerf his gadgets. So his gadget gives him a super instantly. This just makes it so he really hard counters assassins and leaves next to no counterplay just because of how strong that super is against countering them. I think they need to make it so it charges maybe like 80% of the super, 75%, something like that, because it's just far too strong. Next nerf I'm going to predict is with Clancy. So Clancy still is a really annoying brawler. He's not anything like broken anymore, but he's still really toxic, especially when you get to level 3. It's too clear that he's like the best brawler in the game once he gets to that level 3. And, you know, you should be good when you're at level 3, but not near enough unkillable, right? So, again, they need to either make it so when you die, you lose a token or something. Please, they need to at least make it so there's some negatives to dying, or they need to nerf the speed boost or the super damage at level 3. So they need to attack it in some way like that. Next nerf I'm going to predict is with Juju. So in my eyes, I probably don't see her getting a nerf, but I still think at the same time she deserves one because of how strong she is in competitive. So if they were to nerf anything about her, I would maybe nerf either the range of the grass, because it's just too much, you know, the range being more than Piper, it's just too much, or nerfing Gregory's health, because it is a lot of HP to have for a little turret. Then finally, I'm going to predict a nerf with Surge. So Surge received a really tiny nerf with his supercharge rate. That's not the main problem with Surge. It's the fact that he's pretty tanky for what he does. I've always remembered Surge being a squishier brawler, so he can get countered pretty easily. You know, it's high risk, high reward if you want to jump in right. But right now, he has too much HP. So let's just remove like 400, 600 HP from him, because he's just far too strong, let's just face it, especially on grassy maps. He's too tanky. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Let me know whether I missed out on any balance changes, and I'll see you guys next time.